Hello everyone and welcome to Time Gaming. As the community contributor for Indonesia, I got asked lots of questions. The question this time came from Andy. So if like him you have any other burning ruling questions you want the answer to, feel free to ask in the comments below. Well, today I'll be talking about optional effects, so let's break it down one by one. First of all, we have mandatory effects. They are pretty straightforward and simple. If the text contain only actions, they are mandatory effects. Examples are cards like the Red World, Palmas Sigrun, and Time Beast Chronotaurus. When you summon them, their effect will activate regardless, and you cannot choose not to activate the effect. In the case of Balmas Viscount Ellenmeyer, even if your opponent only has one spirit or ultimate, you can still use the when summon effect and target as much as eligible target as possible. In this case, 1. Mandatory effects will also be considered as activated, even if there is no target or if you cannot do everything as instructed. So back to the Red World, even if your opponent has no spirit when it is deployed, the when deployed effect will still be considered as activated, so your opponent will still be able to play their burst. There are effects that gives you a little bit of flexibility, such as with this Camera Build, that destroys any number of opposing spirits or nexuses up to a total cost of 12. In this case, you can choose any number up to 12 before activating the effect, so you can choose 0 if you do not want to destroy your opponent's card. However, the effect is still considered as activated, so opposing burst can still be activated. Before we move on, there are mandatory effects that requires you to do a specific action with cards in your enclosed area, such as your hand. In that case, you may activate the rest of the effect as if the target is not available. For example, with Is a Strength, after you draw, even if you have a cost 6 or lower Angelia of Egypt Spirit or Ultimate in your hand, you don't have to summon it if you don't want to. So secondly, we have normal optional. Simplest optional effect looks like this. There are certain patterns that you will need to pay attention to when identifying optional effects, but in most translations, the sentences are usually open with you may or you can. In this case, you can simply choose to not activate the effect if you don't want to. Some effects are followed by another sentence open with when you have done so. If you want to use this part of the effect, you will have to do the optional part that comes before it. However, this part of the effect may be mandatory.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
One example is the Maiden of the Ice Instruments, Elizabeth. In her case, you can choose to refresh an Ice Princess family spirit or not, but when you do and your opponent has a spirit that can be returned to the hand, you have to return an opposite spirit to the hand. And for the last one, you have the set effect. It is another form of optional effect and it is usually translated into the pattern of by doing A, do B. It is not an official name, but we call it the set effect because unlike the normal optional effect that we just discussed, if you cannot or do not want to resolve all parts of the effect, it will not be activated at all. So in that sense, it counts as an optional effect, as if you just not to activate the action in A, then the effect will not be activated. So with Hermit Ritter Vajarel, there are 3 situations that can happen. If you have no cards in your hand, thus being unable to discard a card, you cannot draw 2. If you have only 1 card in your deck, thus not being able to draw 2 cards, you cannot discard 1 card from your hand. You can also choose not to discard 1 card from your hand, thus not resolving this effect at all. That effect can be quite complicated, because if the effect is interrupted partway, you would have to revert the game state to the game state before the effect is activated. A good example of this is Matsuda Takato's Grandfield. If you have moved 5 cards to your Dyukmon and choose to send 2 cards from opposing life to the reserve, and your opponent uses the Diamond Wall Revival effect to immediately reduce the number of cards sent from their life by 1, as you cannot reduce 2 lives as you have declared, the game state will have to be reverted. The 5 cards that you have put into Dyukmon will be returned to Takato, and opponent's life will not be reduced at all. It will be treated as if it was not activated, but if it has a turn limit, it will still be counted. So in Takato's case, you cannot attempt to activate the Grandfield again in the same turn. In general, if there are no mandatory sentences in the effect and you choose not to activate the optional part, it is not considered as activated. So opposing related bursts such as when the spirit is summoned effect activate bursts cannot be activated. That's all for today. Hopefully it was a help to you guys. And again, if you guys have any other questions you want to ask, just leave them in the comments below. That has been everything from me, Theodore Lu, your host, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye bye!